So I went to the APA Florida conference back in September. It's in Jacksonville, and that's the American Planning Association. In order to get your certification and keep it, you have to do you basically have to take a certain number of credits of continuing education every year. And the conference is a good way to go and knock out most of those credits, like all in a couple of days. So I went up to Jacksonville. It was 3 nights. Got in a ton of these classes. Basically, for the most part, it's planners who have like completed some groundbreaking project or have been doing a particular kind of work for decades, or just completed a lot of projects in general of a particular kind, and they're sort of sharing their knowledge and expertise. So anyway, a bunch of seminars. I probably like 20, and there was only one of them that was disappointing, and the topic was transit accessible, affordable housing in rural areas. The topic itself is super interesting because transit service in rural areas is notoriously very difficult to deliver. And then like being able to not only successfully deliver it, but then combine it, like co-locate it with affordable housing. People want to know, how'd you do it? The delivery of it, like the presentation, was just really poor. It assumed that the audience really knew way more about the specifics of the project than they actually did. And they just sort of like dove into the details without really like explaining how they got there. It was dry, it was confusing, and but 1 out of 20 is a good conference. I can't complain. So throughout, I didn't really ask that many questions because, like, most of the time, other people have the same questions and then they ask them pretty early on in the Q&A. Just sort of hang back and listen, and usually my question gets answered directly or indirectly. Of all of the questions that I heard asked and that were answered, there was only one answer that was disappointing. It's not really the environment or the situation where you want to kind of needle someone for more information or for a better answer. You just wait until it's over and you go up to them afterwards. In this case, I didn't. The class that I was in was ostensibly on quick builds in Tampa. And a quick build could be any project that could potentially take a long time to build and require a lot of funding, but you can actually build it in like a month or two on the cheap by cutting a lot of corners. So kind of think of it as the opposite of overbuilt, over-engineered projects. Or another way to put it is that, like, say you want to build a two-way protected cycle track, and it's going to take you 3 years to fully fund it, and you really only have enough money now to get it 90% designed, or maybe like 70% engineered, while you're waiting for your state grant or your federal grant or whatever. You can get people using this cycle track in like a month or two, because the amount of money that you have that you would have normally spent on engineering, you can put into actually, like, quote unquote building it with some paint and some flex posts. That's in a nutshell what a quick build is. On this particular panel, there was a lot of talk about road safety, and that's basically what I was there for. Like, I wanted to hear about how they were getting the quick builds done and sort of what the results were, right? Because if the goal is safety, then the outcome should be safety. Like, you want to see fewer crashes, you want to see definitely fewer fatalities, and then you also want to see, like, not only while you see that drop in casualties, you also want to see more users. So it's actually like the rate of casualty drops precipitously. That's the goal. And if you can do that with a quick build, then there should be quick builds everywhere. It's a personal interest of mine. Like, the way that I see it is that in the US, we have almost twice as many road deaths as homicides. At the national level, it works on the state level, it works on the county level. Like, it's ridiculous. So it's pretty clear to me that as a society, we're focused on the wrong public safety problem. If you want to stop people from being killed needlessly, pay attention to the idiots on the road who are killing people and stop them before they do. Because there's usually some warnings before that kind of stuff happens. Okay, so we have a public safety problem. How do we solve it? But first, like, what exactly is the problem? People are dying on the roads, yeah, okay, but how exactly? Who is dying, where, and under what circumstances? You can't even begin to propose solutions if you don't have the data to know who it is you're trying to protect and when and where, right? So, like, for example, we know like 20% of pedestrian fatalities happen in intersections. That's a great data point. People have used it. Daylighting intersections is becoming a big thing now. And where it's been used, it's been pretty successful. So, in this particular talk that I went to at the APA conference, they're focusing on bike and ped safety and quick builds to improve safety. And so the stats that they offered focused on those two groups. The whole time I'm wondering, like, wow, this is really dramatic. Like, these statistics are really dramatic. What is driving this rise in pedestrians getting hit by cars? Like, what the hell is going on? And so I didn't hear anyone ask it. So at the end, I asked, do we have the background data that might help explain what's going on? Like, are more people walking and cycling so that there's a rise in these car-ped conflicts? Are people just speeding way more than they used to, and that's what's killing more people? Is it like, what the hell's going on? The response that I got was cold, like the question was unwelcome, and the answer that I got seemed defensive. And like, I wasn't asking from a place of being critical. I'm asking, what are we solving for? Like, what is happening? Because if it's people speeding, then we know what we need to do, right? If it's people not paying attention because they're on their phone, then we know what we need to do. So the answer was a very short no. It's the bigger cars. People who get hit aren't surviving. Which was really disappointing to hear in real time, because I knew there was important information missing from the answer, and like, it hadn't been revealed in the data leading up to that. Like, it could be true that it's just bigger cars, but if it was, then the answer should have been something like, well, crashes have been relatively stable over the years, so it's not a rise in crashes, it's a rise in fatalities. And we've looked at the data about the cars that are involved in these fatal crashes, and we've seen that it's SUVs. So basically, we know that the cars are bigger, and so they're just more dangerous. But that would go beyond just a hypothesis. But without that data, without being able to say that, then that's it. That's where you are. It's just a hypothesis. You have to do the research to prove your hypothesis. And I wasn't hearing that. But more than not hearing that, like, I wasn't hearing anything useful. We can spend a lot of time and some money doing quick builds, but like, will they actually reduce fatalities? My hypothetical good answer looks like it's not true, because fatal crashes are on the rise in Canada, in Australia, in the UK. They're up 19% in Ireland, 14% in Spain, and 11% in France. And that's just 2022 to 2023, because the 23 data is in now, and we can make those comparisons to 22. It's not looking good. And in France, the fatalities are up 11% year over year, but 2021 to 22, they were already up over 40%. In France in particular, right, VMT or VKT, as you would say in the rest of the world, is up 7.5%. So that explains part of the rise. You have more traffic, you're going to have more conflicts. And the French authorities are citing drowsiness and fatigue in 18% of cases. The presence of pedestrians, whatever the hell that means, are cited in 17% of cases. Excessive speed in 16%. And, quote, drugs, alcohol, and medication are listed as a cause in a plurality of crashes, which is over 20%. And I should add that, like, that number, 21, 22% of fatal crashes involving drugs and alcohol and quote unquote medication, pretty consistent across countries. It's also not just cyclists and pedestrians who are in the crosshairs. Deaths for all road users are on the rise. In the Australian state of Victoria, the government says that all road fatalities are up 23% from last year, while ped deaths are up a more modest 8%. In the Canadian province of Ontario, road deaths are at a 16-year high. And again, drivers seem to be killing themselves and other drivers far faster than they're killing pedestrians. Ireland saw an extra 29 dead in 2023, but only one of those 29 was a pedestrian. The biggest jump in Ireland by far was deaths of drivers and passengers. So, what in the world is going on? In nearly everything I've read, from this New York Times article to official statements from Ireland, France, Spain, and Canadian and Australian state police, they all say some version of drugs and alcohol, distracted driving, and road rage. But what no one is saying is that across countries, super consistently, 77 to 78% of drivers involved in a fatal crash are male. Most of those males are age 17 to 34. Guys, chill the fuck out. Going through this New York Times article, they have this great graph that shows the death rate for motor vehicles per 100 million miles traveled. To me, that's really the only metric that matters. Yes, like you want people to drive less for the environment, for people's health, and so fewer people die. This is really the metric of road safety, right? Like, the more you fly in a plane, the more likely you are to get cancer from, increased UV exposure. You raise your chances of dying in a plane crash. It's the same with cars. The more that you put yourself on the road, the higher the risk. Eventually, you're going to run into one of those idiots. And hopefully, you're not the idiot. Then they switch to this graph, vehicle deaths per 1 million residents. The US and Australia have really similar VMT per capita. Canada is a little bit lower, and the UK is much lower. So, like, right off the bat, the metric's not the same. I don't know why you would look at those two graphs, right? Like, I think everybody knows that Americans drive a lot. And yeah, that's a problem. Like, just getting people to drive less would reduce road deaths. Yeah, they spend a minute here talking about cell phones, but then they also point to the fact that, like, Europeans are way more likely to drive a manual transmission. And so it's like you can't really hold a phone. I mean, you can. I've seen it, but it's really difficult. And besides, like, that sort of like holding a phone while you're driving isn't even consistent across states in the U.S. Like, if you go to like New York and New Jersey, you hardly ever see it. Here in Florida, you see it all the time, and it drives me nuts. It's difficult to use as an explanation, or as at least as like the only explanation, because road deaths are on the rise everywhere, and cell phone use is not the same everywhere. Yeah, I mean, this article is kind of sad because it's not that old. It's from December 11th, and it incorrectly states that the rise in traffic fatalities is only happening in the U.S., which is why I'm doing this, because it's, I mean, there's so much wrong with the New York Times, and this isn't really surprising. And then they kind of repeat the refrain about weed and alcohol, and they also point to homelessness, an increase in homelessness. I don't know how much homelessness has increased in other countries relative to the U.S., but I do know in LA from the data that almost 1/3 of all the pedestrian fatalities in LA County are homeless people. And like, having driven in Philly and San Francisco and Oakland, I've experienced driving at night and people just walking out of the shadows, like right into the road, Happens all the time. And in fact, we have monthly Vision Zero meetings at work, and the police are there too, because they're part of the Vision Zero team. And we didn't have any pedestrian fatalities last year, and we had one the year before. It was a homeless guy, and then the two the year before that were also two homeless guys. Yes, you spend your life on the street, it does make you more vulnerable for sure. And if you're mentally ill or you're on drugs, you're gonna do dangerous stuff. But yeah, so I had to go to a meeting today, and I was walking to the train, and I was waiting, and I'm thinking about that article, and I'm thinking about all the data, and it got me thinking about when I was in the Army, about all the just there weren't really a lot of them. You always knew who they were, and no one wanted to be around them because they were just dangerous to be around. It's not the kind of environment you can screw around in. There are guns, there's heavy equipment everywhere. Like, people can get killed, and they do get killed, and no one wants to die in training. In fact, I was at Fort Bragg for it's not called Fort Bragg anymore. It's Fort Liberty. Anyway, I was there for just over 3 years. I was not in the 82nd, but we were just down the road from them. And there was a sign as you sort of drove past the division headquarters, and it said, it was basically like one of those workplace safety signs, except that it said how many days since last division fatality. So it'd be 41 days since last division fatality. And if the sign ever got to 82, everyone on post got the day off. In the 3 years and 2 months that I was there, we only got 2 days off. That sign only ever got to 82 twice for a fatality. So no one wanted to be around these guys. They would get Article 15s for just doing dumb shit. Some of them got chaptered out. Some of them, and the crazy thing is, they would pass a test, and then they would get to drive this big truck, and they would do something dumb, and then they would get reprimanded. Then they would do something dumb again, and then they would get retrained, and then they would get reprimanded again. And eventually were just prohibited from operating certain equipment. And it's basically you get a bunch of chances, and then you may or may not get some kind of official punishment. But basically, you're never going to get promoted. You'll just be a private until you get chaptered out, or they don't let you re-enlist, or whatever. You're just not going to make it past that your first enlistment. It's just not going to happen. I don't know what it is. If it's ADHD, if it's some other problem. I don't know, but we all know people like that, with just really limited self-awareness and with even lower situational awareness. And that kind of thing stands out in an environment like that. Even if you can't picture that person personally in your life, you've seen them on TV. They're the kind of people who would walk up to a bison or a bear and should not have a license to operate heavy machinery. They cannot properly assess the risks to themselves and are seriously compromised when it comes to their own safety. And so they definitely can't be trusted to look out for other people's safety. And yet, for some reason, there's this expectation that everyone can, right? And it's cross-cultural. And just because you can show up and take a driving test doesn't mean that you actually belong on the road driving a car. I mean, some countries and even some states in the US have already made the driving age older, and they have graduated licenses. I mean, that's pretty common in most countries. The sort of continuous assessment, I think, is lacking. I mean, when I lived in Australia, speed cameras were everywhere. The drunk driving stops were everywhere, where the cops would just flag you over and then stick a breathalyzer in your face and tell you to blow. It was weird to me, but I understood why. And one of the articles that I was reading was talking about the rise in the UK in road deaths. And again, Even in the UK, numbers are up. It's mostly drivers and passengers. Ped deaths are up a little too. Cyclist deaths are up a little bit more, but most of the rise is people in cars. One of the officials was saying, we want 5-star drivers in 5-star cars on 5-star roads. I really couldn't agree more with that. If you're going to get behind the wheel of a car, you need to be a really good driver, like a professional. You need to constantly prove not only are you a good driver, but you're a safe driver and that you're always on your game. All right. I think that's enough trash talking for this time around. I'm Jim. This is Urban Legends. Thanks for watching.